The rain drummed against the windows of our house on Maple Street, the same relentless Oregon winter storm that had taken Mike from me 3 weeks ago. I sat in his home office, surrounded by boxes of his belongings that I couldn't bring myself to pack away. The funeral flowers had long since wilted, the casseroles from neighbors had been eaten or thrown out, and the sympathy cards were finally put away in a drawer I hoped I'd never have to open again. But his silver laptop sat there on the desk, untouched, its screen dark and cold like everything else in my world had become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'd been avoiding it. The laptop represented the last piece of Mike I hadn't gone through, the final frontier of his life that I wasn't ready to explore. The police had returned it along with his other personal effects from the crash site, but I'd simply placed it on his desk and walked away. Every time I passed his office, I could feel its presence, like it was waiting for me, holding secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Mike had always been protective of his work computer, not out of secrecy, but because it contained sensitive insurance files and client information. But now, 3 weeks after losing him on that icy stretch of Highway 22, I needed to see if there was anything important his employer needed, any loose ends that required my attention. The decision to finally open the laptop came on a Thursday morning when Richard Stevenson, Mike's boss at Pacific Northwest Insurance, called asking about some missing case files. His voice was gentle but persistent as he explained that there were several claims that Mike had been handling personally, and they needed to access his work to ensure their clients weren't left hanging. I assured Richard that I would check Mike's computer and get back to him, but after hanging up, I realized I was terrified of what I might find. Not because I suspected anything wrong, but because opening that laptop felt like opening a door to the last day of Mike's life, a day I wasn't ready to revisit. Mike had left for work that morning like any other. He kissed me goodbye in the kitchen while I was grading spelling tests from my third-grade class at Riverside Elementary. He complained about the weather forecast, joking that Oregon drivers forgot how to handle rain the moment the first drop fell, let alone the ice that was predicted for later in the day. I told him to be careful, the same thing I said every morning, never imagining it would be the last time. He grabbed his travel mug of coffee, his laptop bag, and his keys, waving at me through the window as he backed out of our driveway. 6 hours later, I got the call that changed everything. The laptop felt heavier than it should have as I carried it to the kitchen table, away from the suffocating atmosphere of his office. I needed natural light, needed to feel less trapped by the weight of his absence. My hands trembled as I lifted the screen and pressed the power button. The familiar startup sound seemed too loud in the quiet house, and I found myself looking toward the front door, half expecting Mike to walk through it and ask what I was doing with his work computer. The login screen appeared, and I stared at his profile picture, a photo I'd taken of him last summer at Willow Creek Park, grinning with his hair messy from the wind. I knew his password, he'd never hidden it from me. It was our wedding date combined with our dog's name, simple and sentimental, just like Mike. The desktop loaded slowly, revealing the organized chaos that was Mike's digital workspace. Files were arranged in neat folders labeled by month and client name, his email program automatically opened in the background, and his browser showed tabs he'd left open the day he died. Seeing his digital life frozen in time hit me harder than I'd expected. Here was evidence of his last normal day, when he'd had no idea that within hours he'd be gone, leaving me to piece together not just his work files, but the rest of our life without him. I started with the task Richard had given me, opening his work folders and looking for the missing case files. Mike had always been meticulous about his work, and his digital organization reflected that. Each case was thoroughly documented, with photos, reports, and correspondence neatly filed away. I was actually proud seeing how professional and careful he'd been, how much his clients had meant to him. But as I scrolled through the folders, something caught my attention. There was a folder labeled Personal Projects buried among his work files, which seemed odd since Mike was strict about keeping personal and professional materials separate. Curiosity won over caution, and I clicked on the folder. Inside were documents that made no immediate sense to me. Spreadsheets with budget calculations, research on different states and their cost of living, and what appeared to be job listings from various cities across the country. My heart started pounding as I opened file after file, each one revealing what looked like an elaborate plan to relocate, to start over somewhere new. There were comparison charts of housing markets in Denver, Austin, and Portland, Maine. There were salary calculators, and moving cost estimates. Mike had researched everything from school districts to climate data, as if he was planning a major life change. The most disturbing discovery was a document titled Conversation Points that appeared to be notes for a discussion we'd never had. The bullet points included phrases like Jess's reaction to change, timeline for transition, and how to present opportunities without pressure. My stomach dropped as I realized Mike had been planning something significant, something that involved both of us, but he'd never mentioned any of it to me. We'd lived in Riverside our entire relationship, had bought our house here, had built our life in this small Oregon town. The idea that he was researching a complete relocation without telling me felt like a betrayal, even though I knew that was irrational. I kept digging, finding more evidence of this secret planning. Mike had contacted real estate agents in multiple cities, had researched job opportunities in his field, and had even looked into the transfer policies at his current company. The dates on these files went back months, meaning this wasn't a recent or impulsive idea. He'd been systematically planning a major life change, and had kept it completely hidden from me. I thought about all the evenings he'd spent on his laptop, claiming he was catching up on work reports. All the times he'd seemed distracted or lost in thought, and I'd assumed he was just tired from a long day. Had he been planning our future without me this entire time? The betrayal stung, but it was overshadowed by confusion. Mike and I had always made decisions together. We discussed everything from weekend plans to major purchases, always as a
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
team. The idea that he would research such a monumental change without including me in the process was completely out of character. Mike was the most transparent person I'd ever known, sometimes to a fault. He shared every thought, every concern, every random idea that crossed his mind. This level of secrecy was foreign to everything I knew about my husband. I opened his email program, hoping to find some explanation, some context that would make sense of what I'd discovered. His inbox was organized just like his files, with work emails clearly separated from personal correspondence. But as I scrolled through his sent messages, I found several emails to real estate agents in different cities, inquiring about market conditions and property availability. The tone of these emails was professional but eager, like someone seriously considering a move rather than just casually researching. He'd even set up automated alerts for job postings in specific fields and locations. The final piece of the puzzle was buried in his drafts folder. An email addressed to Richard Stevenson, his boss, with the subject line request for meeting care discussion. The message was dated the same day as his accident, created just hours before he left for work that final morning. The email was formal but direct, requesting a private meeting to discuss potential career advancement opportunities and geographic flexibility within the company. Mike had been planning to talk to his boss about a transfer or relocation, something he'd never mentioned to me despite months of preparation. Reading that draft email felt like discovering a parallel version of my husband, someone who made plans and decisions in secret, someone who was ready to uproot our entire life without warning. I stared at the screen, trying to reconcile this evidence with the man I thought I knew. Mike had never expressed dissatisfaction with his job or our town. He'd never complained about feeling stuck or wanting a change of scenery. If anything, he'd always seemed content with our quiet life in Riverside, with our routines and our small circle of friends. The house felt impossibly quiet, as I sat there processing what I'd found. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and I could hear the neighbor's dog barking in the distance, normal sounds of a normal day in a life that no longer felt normal at all. Mike had been planning to change everything, and I'd been completely oblivious. All those months of research and preparation, all those late nights on his computer, and I'd never suspected a thing. I felt stupid and blind, like I'd been living with a stranger who just happened to look like my husband. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma Rodriguez, my best friend who'd been checking on me regularly since the funeral. She was asking if I needed anything from the grocery store, and reminding me that I wasn't eating enough. I looked at her message and realized I couldn't respond, couldn't pretend everything was fine, when I'd just discovered that my entire understanding of my marriage might have been wrong. Mike was gone, and now I was learning that he'd been planning to take us somewhere else, to start over in a new place with new opportunities. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. He'd finally made the ultimate move, just not the one he'd been planning. I closed the laptop and pushed it away from me, unable to process any more revelations. The logical part of my brain tried to find innocent explanations. Maybe he'd been planning a surprise for me, or maybe he'd wanted to have all the information before presenting options for our future. But the emotional part of me felt deceived and hurt, like I'd been excluded from decisions about my own life. Mike had always been a planner, someone who researched everything thoroughly before making decisions, but this level of secrecy was unprecedented in our relationship. The afternoon sun was beginning to break through the storm clouds, casting long shadows across the kitchen table where Mike's laptop sat closed and silent. I thought about calling Richard back to tell him I'd found the files he needed, but I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. I needed time to understand what I'd discovered, to figure out what it meant for how I remembered Mike and our life together. Had he been unhappy? Had I missed signs that he wanted something different? The questions multiplied in my mind, each one more painful than the last. As evening approached, I finally opened the laptop again, but this time I focused on finding the work files Richard needed. I created copies of the case documents and prepared to send them to the office, trying to focus on practical tasks rather than the emotional minefield I'd uncovered. But even as I organized Mike's professional materials, I couldn't stop thinking about that draft email, about the months of secret planning, about the future we'd never have the chance to discuss. Mike had been preparing for a conversation that would never happen, planning for a life we'd never get to live together. The weight of his absence felt heavier now, complicated by the knowledge that he'd been ready to change everything. I'd been grieving the life we'd built together in Riverside, but now I realized I was also grieving the unknown life he'd been planning for us somewhere else. The future he'd researched and organized and carefully prepared was gone too, lost in that crash on Highway 22, along with all the dreams and plans he'd never had the chance to share with me. The next morning, I woke up with Mike's laptop still haunting my thoughts. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning as my mind raced through every conversation we'd had in the past year, searching for clues I might have missed. The coffee maker gurgled to life automatically at 6:30, just like it had every morning since Mike programmed it 3 years ago. But instead of the comfort that routine usually brought, it felt like a mockery of the predictable life I thought we'd been living together. I called in sick to Riverside Elementary, something I rarely did, but the thought of facing my third graders, and pretending everything was normal, felt impossible. Emma had been texting since 7, worried because I hadn't responded to her messages from the night before. I finally called her back while staring out at the gray Oregon morning, my voice hoarse from crying. "Jess, you sound terrible. What happened?" Emma's concern was immediate and genuine. She'd been my anchor since the accident, the one person who could get me to eat or shower or leave the house when grief threatened to swallow me whole. "I found something on Mike's laptop," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, I think he was planning to leave Riverside. To leave everything we built here." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally Emma spoke, her voice careful and measured. "What kind of plans?" I told her everything. The folders full of research, the real estate contacts, the job searches in cities I'd never expressed interest in visiting, let alone living in. I told her about the draft email to Richard, about months of secret preparation for a conversation that never happened. Emma listened without interrupting, and I could hear her moving around her kitchen, probably making the strong coffee she always relied on during emotional conversations. "Jess," she said finally, "maybe there's more to this than you're seeing. Mike loved you. Everyone could see that. There has to be a reason he didn't tell you about this research. What reason could possibly justify months of planning our future without including me?" The hurt in my voice surprised even me. "Emma, he was ready to uproot our entire life, and I had no idea. How does someone hide something that big?" Emma was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her thinking. She'd known Mike almost as long as I had watched our relationship grow from tentative dating to solid marriage. If anyone could make sense of this, it would be her. "Remember how he proposed?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. Of course I remembered. Mike had spent 3 months planning the perfect proposal, researching my favorite flowers, my preferred restaurants, even consulting with Emma about what kind of ring I'd want. He'd arranged every detail of a weekend trip to the coast, but he'd been so nervous about keeping it secret that he'd barely been able to function. He'd almost spoiled the surprise twice, and Emma had to talk him down from confessing his plans just to relieve his own anxiety. "He was terrible at keeping secrets," I said slowly, understanding where Emma was going with this. Exactly. Mike couldn't even keep your birthday surprise quiet for more than a week. You really think he could plan something this major for months without having a reason to keep you out of the loop? I wanted to believe her, wanted to find an innocent explanation for what I'd discovered, but the evidence felt overwhelming. Then what's the reason, Emma? What could possibly justify this level of secrecy? I don't know, she admitted. But I know Mike, and I know he wouldn't plan your future without you unless he thought he was protecting you from something. Maybe he wanted to have all the options researched before presenting them to you. Maybe he was afraid you'd worry about the process. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen with my untouched coffee, staring at Mike's laptop. Emma's words echoed in my mind, but they couldn't completely ease the sting of feeling excluded from such major decisions. I thought about the Mike I'd known, the man who asked my opinion on everything from what movie to watch to what color to paint the guest bedroom. He'd never made unilateral decisions about our life together, which made this discovery even more confusing. I opened the laptop again, this time with a different purpose. Instead of looking for evidence of betrayal, I tried to approach Mike's research with curiosity about his motivations. I read through his notes more carefully, paying attention to the criteria he'd used to evaluate different cities. The spreadsheets weren't random, they were methodical comparisons based on specific factors that mattered to both of us. Climate data showed he'd prioritized places with mild winters, something I'd mentioned countless times during Oregon's particularly brutal cold snaps. The school district research focused on areas with strong elementary education programs and libraries, clearly considering my career as a school librarian. He'd researched cultural amenities like museums and theaters, things I loved but Riverside sorely lacked. The more I read, the more I realized Mike hadn't been planning his escape from our life, he'd been planning an enhancement of it. One document particularly caught my attention. It was titled Quality of Life Assessment, and contained detailed notes about what Mike saw as limitations in our current situation. He'd written about the lack of career advancement opportunities for both of us in a small town like Riverside. He'd noted the distance from family. His mother Linda lived in California, and my parents were in Michigan, both requiring expensive flights for visits. He'd researched cities that would put us closer to one set of parents while still offering professional opportunities. The notes weren't complaints about our life, but observations about how it could be improved. Mike had written about wanting to give me access to better library systems, bigger schools with more resources, professional development opportunities that simply didn't exist in Riverside. He'd researched cities with active literary communities, places where I could pursue the writing I'd given up when we moved here after college. He'd even looked into graduate programs in library science, noting which cities had the best universities for advancing my education. I felt something shift inside me as I read his research with new eyes. This wasn't the work of a husband planning to escape his life, it was the work of a husband trying to build a better future for his wife. Mike had been thinking about my dreams, the ones I'd stopped talking about because they seemed impossible in our small-town reality. He'd been planning ways to make those dreams accessible again. The job searches told the same story. While Mike had certainly looked for opportunities that would advance his own career, his primary focus seemed to be on locations that would benefit both of us. He'd identified cities where his insurance expertise would be valued, but where I could also find meaningful work in larger library systems or educational institutions. His research showed careful consideration of work-life balance, commute times, and professional growth potential for both of us. But the most revealing document was one I'd initially overlooked, a letter that appeared to be a draft of something he'd planned to write to me. The file was simply labeled for Jess, and dated 2 weeks before his accident. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure whether I was ready for what I might find. My dearest Jess, the letter began, I've been watching you lately, and I see something in your eyes that breaks my heart. You think I don't notice when you get that distant look while we're having dinner, or when you stop mid-sentence talking about your day at the library. You think I don't see how you've settled into our life here, but I do see it, and I see how much more you're capable of than this small town can offer you. I had to stop reading for a moment, overwhelmed by the tenderness in his words. Mike had noticed things about me that I thought I'd hidden, had seen restlessness I didn't even want to admit to myself. The letter continued, I've been doing research, and I know that probably sounds secretive, and maybe even scary, but I wanted to have real options to present to you, not just vague ideas about someday moving somewhere with better opportunities. I found places where you could work in research libraries, where you could go back to school if you wanted, where you could write again, without feeling like it's just a hobby because there's no literary community here to support you. My vision blurred with tears as I read Mike's observations about my abandoned dreams. He'd noticed how I'd stopped writing poetry after we moved to Riverside, how I'd given up on the idea of pursuing my master's degree, how I'd convinced myself that being content was the same as being fulfilled. Mike had seen through my contentment to the ambition I'd buried beneath small-town practicality. I know you'll say you're happy here, the letter went on, and I know you mean it when you say it. But I also know you used to talk about traveling, about experiencing different cultures, about working with rare book collections, or helping develop literacy programs in underserved communities. Those dreams didn't disappear just because we settled down, they're still there, and they deserve a chance to grow. The letter revealed Mike's plan to present his research as a gift, not as a decision he'd made unilaterally. He'd wanted to show me that leaving Riverside didn't mean abandoning the life we'd built together, but expanding it into something bigger. He'd researched cities where we could buy a house similar to ours, where we could afford the same lifestyle, while having access to opportunities that simply didn't exist in our small Oregon town. Mike had even considered my attachments to Riverside, noting which cities had similar climates or outdoor recreation opportunities. He'd looked into direct flights back to Oregon so we could visit easily, and he'd researched job markets to ensure we'd both be financially stable during any transition. Every detail of his planning showed consideration for my comfort and my dreams in equal measure. The final paragraph of the letter destroyed any remaining doubt about Mike's motivations. I want to give you the world, Jess, or at least a bigger piece of it than we can access from here. I want to see you excited about your work again, challenged and inspired, instead of just going through the motions. I want us to explore new places together, to build an even better life than the good one we have now. But most importantly, I want you to know that wherever we go, whatever we do, my favorite part of any plan is that it includes you. I closed the laptop and sat in the kitchen crying, but this time the tears weren't from hurt or betrayal. They were from missing Mike so intensely it felt like a physical ache, and from realizing how deeply he'd loved me, how carefully he'd been planning our future together. The man I'd married hadn't been keeping secrets to deceive me. He'd been keeping secrets to surprise me with possibilities I'd stopped believing were available. The irony was devastating. Mike had died on his way to work on the same day he'd planned to ask his boss about transfer opportunities, probably hoping to come home that evening with concrete information about making his research a reality. He'd spent months preparing to offer me the dreams I'd given up, and I'd spent the last day wondering whether he'd been planning to leave me behind. Emma's words from our phone call echoed in my mind. Mike wouldn't plan our future without me, unless he thought he was protecting me from something. Now I understood what he'd been protecting me from: the disappointment of hoping for changes that might not be possible, the anxiety of uncertainty while he researched whether his ideas were feasible. He'd wanted to present solutions, not problems, opportunities, not just wishes. I thought about all the times in recent months when Mike had asked seemingly random questions about my work, about whether I missed certain aspects of city life, about what I'd do if money weren't a consideration. I'd answered casually, not realizing he was gathering information for his research. He'd been listening carefully to my responses, building his plans around my expressed interests and half-forgotten dreams. The house felt different now, not like a tomb of our interrupted life, but like the foundation Mike had been planning to build upon. He hadn't wanted to escape our marriage or our history. He'd wanted to expand our future. The kitchen where we'd shared countless meals, the living room where we'd spent quiet evenings, the bedroom where we'd planned our days and shared our dreams. Mike had seen all of it as portable, as something we could recreate anywhere, while adding new experiences and opportunities. I opened his browser history, looking for more clues about his timeline and intentions. Mike had bookmarked apartment listings in several cities, but he'd also saved articles about the best times to make major life changes, about how couples could maintain strong relationships during relocations, about the psychological benefits of embracing new challenges together. He'd been preparing for every aspect of a potential move, including the emotional and relational challenges we might face. One bookmark led to a forum discussion about career changes in your 30s, where Mike had posted questions about transitioning between similar jobs in different markets. His username was a combination of our initials and our anniversary date. Even in anonymous online spaces, he'd carried our relationship with him. His post showed a man genuinely excited about new possibilities, but careful about making changes that would benefit both partners in a marriage. The most touching discovery was a private Pinterest board Mike had created, filled with images of homes in the cities he'd researched, restaurants he wanted to take me to, museums and theaters he thought I'd enjoy. He'd saved pictures of library interiors, from universities where I could potentially work, hiking trails we could explore together, and bookstores where I might feel inspired to start writing again. The board was titled Adventures with Jess, and had been actively updated right up until the week before his accident. As I scrolled through Mike's vision of our potential future, I realized he'd been falling in love with possibilities on my behalf. Every saved image showed a man imagining his wife's happiness in new settings, picturing our life together, enhanced by different experiences and opportunities. He'd researched not just practical concerns like cost of living and job markets, but also the intangible qualities that make a place feel like home: community connections, cultural richness, natural beauty. The late afternoon light was fading when I finally closed the laptop again, but this time I felt exhausted rather than betrayed. Mike's secret hadn't been about excluding me from decisions, it had been about including me in dreams I'd stopped believing were possible. He'd spent months working to expand our world, and I'd spent the last 24 hours assuming he'd been trying to escape it. I called Richard Stevenson to let him know I'd found the case files he needed, and would have them delivered to the office the next day.
Voice was warm with sympathy as he thanked me and asked if there was anything else the company could do to help during this difficult time. I almost asked him about the meeting Mike had planned to request, about whether the company had any history of helping employees relocate, but I stopped myself. That conversation belonged to a future that would never happen now. The evening stretched ahead of me, quiet and lonely as all my evenings had been since Mike's death. But for the first time in 3 weeks I felt connected to him again instead of abandoned by him. Understanding his research had restored my sense of the man I'd married, thoughtful, loving, always planning ways to make our life better. Mike hadn't died keeping secrets from me, he died carrying dreams for both of us. I made dinner for one, something I was still learning to do after 6 years of cooking for two, but as I sat at our kitchen table, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost anymore. I was thinking about what Mike had been trying to give me, about the adventures he'd wanted us to have together, about the bigger life he'd believed we deserved. The future he'd researched was gone, but the love that had motivated his planning was still real, still mine to carry forward. That night, I took his laptop to bed with me and spent hours reading through his notes, his research, his carefully constructed plans for our happiness. Mike had been preparing to ask me to be brave with him, to take risks for the possibility of greater rewards, to trust that our love could flourish anywhere we chose to plant it. He died before we could have that conversation, but his words in that draft letter had given me the gift of understanding what he'd wanted to say. For the first time since his death, I fell asleep feeling loved rather than abandoned, surrounded by evidence of how carefully Mike had been planning our future together. His last act had been driving to work on the day he'd planned to request a meeting about new opportunities for both of us. He died pursuing dreams he'd wanted to share with me, and that knowledge changed everything about how I understood his loss. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before the accident. Mike's laptop lay open beside me on the bed, his research still glowing on the screen from where I'd fallen asleep reading his notes about graduate programs in library science. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a mission beyond just surviving each day. I needed to understand more about Mike's plans, needed to see if the opportunities he'd researched were still available, needed to know if the dreams he'd been nurturing for both of us could somehow still come true. I called Richard Stevenson's office at 8 sharp, knowing he was always the first person at Pacific Northwest Insurance. When his secretary put me through, Richard's voice carried the careful sympathy that had become so familiar since Mike's death, but I could hear genuine warmth beneath the professional politeness. "Jessica, thank you for calling about those files. I hope going through Mike's work materials wasn't too difficult for you. Actually, Richard, I was wondering if I could meet with you in person. There's something I found on Mike's computer that I think you should know about, something he was planning to discuss with you the day of the accident." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if I'd overstepped some boundary I didn't understand. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice gentler than before. "Of course, Jessica, would this afternoon work for you? Say around 2 o'clock. I'll make sure we have privacy to talk." The Pacific Northwest Insurance Building stood on the corner of Main and 3rd Street, a modest 2-story structure that housed most of Riverside's professional services. I'd driven past it countless times but had only been inside once, for the company Christmas party 2 years ago. Walking through the front doors felt surreal, like entering a space that belonged to Mike's world rather than mine. Richard met me in the lobby, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd spoken at Mike's funeral, sharing stories about my husband's dedication to his clients and his gift for making complicated insurance matters understandable to people facing difficult situations. Seeing him now, I realized how much Mike had respected this man, how often he'd quoted Richard's advice about ethics and client care. His office was larger than I'd expected, with windows overlooking the small downtown area and walls lined with certificates and awards recognizing the company's service to the community. Richard gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk and poured coffee from a carafe on a side table. "I want you to know how much we all miss Mike," he said as he settled into his own chair. "He was more than just an excellent employee, he was someone who really understood that this job is about helping people during some of the worst moments of their lives. That's not something you can teach." I nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in my throat that came whenever someone spoke about Mike in the past tense. "Richard, I found something on his computer that I think explains what he wanted to discuss with you." He drafted an email requesting a meeting about career advancement and geographic flexibility. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't seem surprised. He leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully before speaking. "Jessica, can I share something with you that Mike probably wouldn't have mentioned? About 3 months ago, he came to me informally asking about our company's policies regarding transfers and relocations. He didn't make any specific requests, just wanted to understand what options might be available." My heart started beating faster. Mike had been further along in his planning than I'd realized, had already begun having preliminary conversations about making his research a reality. "He said he was exploring possibilities," Richard continued, "but that he wanted to be thorough in his research before making any commitments. I got the impression he was planning something significant, but wanted to make sure it was feasible before involving anyone else in the decision-making process." I pulled out a folder containing printouts of Mike's research, the spreadsheets comparing different cities, the job market analyses, the quality of life assessments. Richard examined them with the careful attention I'd seen him give insurance documents, his expression growing more impressed as he reviewed Mike's work. "This is incredibly thorough," he said finally. "Jessica, your husband had identified some really promising opportunities here. Several of these cities have insurance markets that would welcome someone with Mike's experience and reputation." "Did he mention why he was considering a move?" I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer from reading his letter to me. Richard smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him during our meeting. "He talked about you quite a bit actually, how talented you were, how much you've given up to live in a small town, how he wanted to find ways to support your professional growth. Mike was very proud of your work at the elementary school, but he also seemed to think you were capable of much more than Riverside could offer." The words hit me with unexpected force. Mike hadn't just been planning our future in private, he'd been talking about me, about my potential, about his desire to help me grow. Richard's confirmation that Mike had seen limitations in our current situation made his research feel less like betrayal and more like love. "There's something else," Richard said, reaching into his desk drawer. "Mike asked me to recommend him for a position with our corporate office about 6 weeks ago. I submitted the recommendation, and the response came back just last week." He handed me an official-looking letter with the Pacific Northwest Insurance corporate logo. The letter was addressed to Richard but referenced Mike by name, offering him a senior adjuster position with their regional office in Denver, Colorado. The salary was significantly higher than what he'd been making in Riverside, and the benefits package included relocation assistance and professional development opportunities. "They were interested," Richard explained. "Very interested. Mike's reputation here had reached the corporate level, and they wanted to bring him into a role with more responsibility and better compensation. The position would have been perfect for someone looking to advance their career while maintaining stability with the same company." I stared at the letter, reading Mike's name over and over again. He'd been so close to making his dreams a reality, so close to being able to present me with a concrete opportunity rather than just theoretical possibilities. The job offer was dated just 5 days before his accident. He would have received this confirmation right around the time he'd planned to request that meeting with Richard. "Would the offer still be available?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why the question mattered now. Richard looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful. I suppose it could be, though obviously the circumstances have changed significantly. Jessica, are you thinking about pursuing some of the opportunities Mike was researching? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I hadn't fully considered until that moment. Was I thinking about leaving Riverside? Was I considering following through on plans Mike had made for both of us? The idea felt both terrifying and thrilling, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing I had the choice to jump or step back. I don't know, I answered honestly. I've been so focused on grieving what we lost that I hadn't thought about whether I could still pursue what he'd found. But looking at this research, seeing how much work he put into finding opportunities for both of us, maybe I owe it to him to at least explore the possibilities. Richard leaned forward, his expression serious but encouraging. Jessica, I can't tell you what to do with your life, but I can tell you what I told Mike when he first asked about transfers. Sometimes the best way to honor a relationship is to continue growing, even when you have to do it alone. Mike was planning these changes because he believed in your potential. That potential didn't die with him. After leaving Richard's office, I drove to Willow Creek Park, the place where Mike and I had taken countless walks over the years. The afternoon was crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn light that made everything look golden and possible. I sat on our favorite bench, the one overlooking the creek where we'd talked about everything from daily frustrations to long-term dreams. I thought about the woman I'd been when Mike and I first moved to Riverside after college. I'd been ambitious then, excited about my career in library science, eager to make a difference in literacy education. I'd taken the job at Riverside Elementary as a stepping stone, planning to gain experience before moving on to larger library systems or pursuing advanced degrees. But somewhere along the way, stepping stone had become permanent residence, and ambition had settled into contentment. Mike had never stopped seeing the ambitious woman I'd been, even when I'd forgotten her myself. His research wasn't just about geographic relocation, it was about helping me relocate my sense of possibility, my belief that I could still pursue the dreams I'd put on hold. He'd spent months identifying places where I could thrive professionally, where I could continue growing instead of just maintaining. I pulled out my phone and called Emma, needing to talk through the confusion and excitement swirling in my mind. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "How did the meeting with Mike's boss go?" she asked immediately. "Emma, he had a job offer, a real one with better pay and relocation assistance. Mike was going to present me with an actual opportunity, not just research and possibilities." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should stay here, honor the life Mike and I built together. But another part of me thinks maybe the best way to honor him is to pursue the dreams he wanted us to chase together. Jess, can I tell you something? Mike called me about 2 months ago." My heart stopped. "He called you? About what?" "About you. He was worried that you'd given up too much to live in Riverside, that you'd convinced yourself being content was the same as being fulfilled. He asked me if I thought you'd be open to making a big change if the right opportunity came along." I felt tears starting again, but they weren't tears of grief this time. They were tears of recognition, of understanding how deeply Mike had seen me and loved me. "What did you tell him?" I whispered. "I told him the truth, that you were happy but not challenged, settled but not inspired. I told him that the Jessica I knew in college had dreams bigger than Riverside could accommodate, and that maybe it was time for both of you to think about what came next." Emma's words confirmed what I'd been slowly realizing since reading Mike's research. He hadn't been planning to leave our life behind, he'd been planning to expand it, to create space for the person I'd been before small-town practicality had made me smaller. "There's more," Emma continued. "He swore me to secrecy, but obviously things have changed now. Mike was planning to surprise you for your birthday next month. He wanted to present all his research as a gift, along with concrete job opportunities for both of you. He was going to ask you to consider taking a leap together." The irony was devastating and beautiful at the same time. Mike had died 3 weeks before my birthday, 3 weeks before he would have revealed months of loving preparation for our future. He'd been planning the ultimate surprise, the gift of possibility itself. "Emma, what if I actually did it? What if I applied for some of the positions Mike found, explored some of the cities he researched? Would that be crazy?" "Jess, what would be crazy is letting his work go to waste. Mike saw potential in you that you'd stopped seeing in yourself. Maybe it's time to look through his eyes and see what he saw." That evening, I spread all of Mike's research across our dining room table, organizing it by city and opportunity. Denver had the most promising prospects. The job offer Richard had shown me: 3 major university library systems, a vibrant literary community, and a cost of living that would actually be lower than Riverside despite the better opportunities. Austin had appealing cultural amenities and a growing library science program at the University of Texas. Portland, Maine offered coastal beauty, similar to Oregon, but with access to better professional networks and continuing education options. Each city represented a different version of the life Mike had envisioned for us, but they all shared common elements: opportunities for professional growth, cultural richness, and communities where I could pursue interests that had languished in Riverside's limited environment. Mike had been offering me a chance to become myself again, to reconnect with ambitions I'd buried under small-town contentment. I found his notes about timeline and transition planning, detailed strategies for making a major move without losing financial stability or emotional security. Mike had thought through everything from selling our house to transferring my teaching credentials to new states. He'd researched moving companies, temporary housing options, and even support networks for people relocating for career advancement. The most touching discovery was a file labeled "Helping Jess Transition" that contained resources for managing the emotional aspects of major life changes. Mike had bookmarked articles about maintaining friendships during relocations, creating new social connections in unfamiliar cities, and preserving meaningful traditions while building new experiences. He'd understood that asking me to leave Riverside wasn't just about changing jobs or addresses. It was about trusting that our love could flourish anywhere, that home was something we created together, rather than something tied to a specific location. I called Richard the next morning and asked if he could put me in touch with the corporate office about the Denver position. My voice shook as I made the request, but my resolve was steady. I wasn't ready to commit to moving, but I was ready to explore the opportunity Mike had been preparing to present to me. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Jessica," Richard said warmly. "I'll reach out to them this afternoon and explain the situation. I'm sure they'd be interested in discussing possibilities with you, especially given Mike's research and planning." After hanging up, I sat in Mike's office, surrounded by his careful preparation for our future. The room no longer felt like a tomb of abandoned dreams, but like a launching pad for possibilities I was finally brave enough to consider. Mike had spent months building a bridge between the life we'd known and the life we could have lived together. Now I had to decide whether I was strong enough to cross that bridge alone, carrying his love and his dreams with me into whatever came next. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny possibilities waiting to be grasped. I opened Mike's laptop one more time and began composing an email to the corporate office in Denver, not knowing where it would lead, but knowing that Mike would want me to find out. For the first time since his death, I was moving forward instead of just trying to survive, and that movement felt like the beginning of healing. I wrote about Mike's research, about his dedication to the company, about my own background in library science and education. I explained that while the circumstances had changed tragically, the opportunities he'd identified still represented genuine possibilities for professional growth and community contribution. I asked for the chance to discuss how I might carry forward his vision, while building my own path toward the future he'd believed I deserved. When I hit send, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, the missing Mike was still a constant ache, but alongside those feelings was something new: anticipation. For the first time in months, I was excited about tomorrow, about next week, about the possibility that my story wasn't over but just beginning a new chapter. Mike had given me the research, the encouragement, and the love I needed to take risks, for the possibility of greater rewards. Now it was up to me, to be brave enough to accept his final gift, the chance to grow into the person he'd always believed I could become. The house felt different that evening, not like a memorial to a ended life, but like a base camp for an adventure about to begin. Mike's presence was everywhere, but instead of haunting me with what I'd lost, it surrounded me with what he'd wanted me to find. I fell asleep that night, not just missing my husband, but excited to see what tomorrow might bring, ready to honor his memory by pursuing the dreams he'd wanted us to share. 3 days after sending my email to the Denver office, my phone rang while I was grading reading assessments at the kitchen table. The caller ID showed a Colorado area code, and my heart immediately started racing. I'd been checking my email obsessively since hitting send, alternating between hope and terror about what kind of response I might receive. "Mrs. Parker, this is Catherine Wells, from Pacific Northwest Insurance Corporate. I received your email about the Denver position, and I was wondering if you might have time for a phone conversation today. Catherine's voice was warm but professional, and I could hear genuine interest beneath her business tone. I cleared my throat, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for calling. First, let me express my sincere condolences about your husband. Richard Stevenson spoke very highly of Mike's work, and from what I understand, he was an exceptional adjuster with a real gift for client relations. The familiar tightness in my chest returned at the mention of Mike, but this time it was accompanied by pride rather than just grief. Thank you. Mike loved his work, especially helping people navigate difficult situations. Mrs. Parker, I have to say, your email was quite remarkable. The research your husband compiled about potential relocation opportunities shows an impressive level of dedication and strategic thinking. Richard also mentioned that you have a background in library science and education. I spent the next 20 minutes talking about my career, my education, my experience working with literacy programs at Riverside Elementary. Catherine asked thoughtful questions about my long-term professional goals, my interest in continuing education, my willingness to relocate for the right opportunity. The conversation felt natural, even energizing, reminding me of aspects of myself I'd forgotten during the fog of grief. I'm going to be direct with you, Mrs. Parker. The position we offered your husband is still available, but obviously we can't simply transfer that offer to you, since your background is in education rather than insurance. However, we have a community outreach coordinator position, opening up in our Denver office, that might be perfect for someone with your skills. My breath caught. Mike's research had been so focused on insurance opportunities for himself that I hadn't considered Pacific Northwest might have other positions that could work for me. The role involves developing literacy and financial education programs for underserved communities. Catherine continued, we partner with libraries, schools, and community centers to help people understand insurance, financial planning, and risk management. It's part of our corporate responsibility initiative, and honestly, we've been looking for someone with both educational experience and genuine passion for community service. The position sounded like a perfect blend of my teaching background and my interest in library science, exactly the kind of meaningful work I'd stopped believing was possible. That sounds incredible, Catherine. I'd love to learn more about it. Would you be willing to come to Denver for an interview? We could arrange travel and accommodations, give you a chance to see the city and meet the team. No commitments, just an opportunity to explore whether this might be a good fit for both of us. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, hardly believing what had just happened. Mike's research had opened a door I never would have found on my own, leading to an opportunity that seemed designed specifically for my skills and interests. The universe felt like it was conspiring to help me follow through on his vision for our future. I called Emma immediately, my voice shaking with excitement and terror. They want to fly me to Denver for an interview, I said, without preamble. Jess, that's amazing. How do you feel? Like I'm about to jump out of an airplane without knowing if my parachute will open, I admitted. Emma, what if I'm making a huge mistake? What if I'm just running away from grief instead of moving towards something better? Emma was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her thinking. Jess, can I ask you something? When you imagine staying in Riverside for the next 10 years, teaching the same grade, living in the same house, maintaining the same routine, how does that feel? The question hit me harder than I expected. The thought of staying exactly where I was, surrounded by memories, but not moving forward, felt suffocating. It feels like dying slowly, I whispered. And when you imagine going to Denver, starting something new, honoring Mike's research by actually using it, how does that feel? Terrifying, I said immediately. But also exciting, like maybe I could become the person Mike saw when he looked at me. Then you have your answer, Emma said gently. Mike did all that research because he believed you were capable of more than Riverside could offer. Maybe it's time to believe that about yourself. The flight to Denver was my first time traveling alone since Mike's death, and every moment of the journey felt loaded with symbolism. I sat by the window, watching Oregon's familiar landscape give way to unfamiliar mountains and plains, feeling like I was literally leaving my old life behind. The woman who boarded the plane in Portland was still grieving, still uncertain, still afraid of making the wrong choice. But somewhere over the Rocky Mountains, I started to feel like maybe I was also becoming someone new. Catherine Wells met me at the airport, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of confident energy that made me immediately feel more capable just by being near her. She drove me through downtown Denver, pointing out libraries, cultural centers, and neighborhoods that might interest me, painting a picture of a city that felt both cosmopolitan and accessible. Mike's research was incredibly thorough, she said as we passed the Denver Public Library's main branch. He identified this area as having some of the best library systems in the country, and he was right. The professional development opportunities here are outstanding, especially for someone interested in literacy education. The Pacific Northwest Insurance corporate office was nothing like the small building in Riverside. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the mountains, and the space buzzed with the energy of people engaged in meaningful work. Catherine introduced me to team members, who would be my colleagues if I took the position, and I was struck by how passionate everyone seemed about their community outreach programs. "We're not just selling insurance," explained David Martinez, the program director. "We're trying to build stronger communities by helping people understand how to protect what they've worked for." The literacy component is crucial because financial education only works if people can actually read and understand the materials we provide. The interview itself felt more like a collaborative planning session than an interrogation. We discussed program development, community partnerships, and long-term goals for expanding literacy-based financial education. I found myself contributing ideas, suggesting partnerships with schools and libraries, drawing on my teaching experience to propose new approaches to curriculum development. "Mrs. Parker," Catherine said as the formal interview concluded, "I'm going to be direct again. We'd like to offer you this position. The salary is competitive, we provide full relocation assistance, and the benefits package is comprehensive. But more importantly, this role would allow you to create something meaningful while building the kind of career your husband envisioned for you." The offer was generous, more than I'd been making at Riverside Elementary, with opportunities for professional growth I'd stopped imagining were possible. But beyond the practical benefits, the position represented something deeper, a chance to honor Mike's faith in my potential, while building a life that felt purposeful rather than just safe. "Can I have some time to consider it?" I asked, though part of me wanted to say yes immediately. "Of course, take all the time you need, but Jessica, I hope you'll seriously consider this opportunity. Your husband saw something in
You that we see too, the potential to make a real difference in people's lives while growing professionally in ways that might not be possible in a smaller community." That evening, Catherine took me to dinner at a restaurant Mike had bookmarked in his research, a small place in the Arts District known for supporting local writers and hosting literary events. The atmosphere was exactly what I'd been missing in Riverside: creative energy, intellectual conversation, the sense that art and literature mattered to the community around me. "Mike chose well," Catherine said as we looked at the reading schedule posted by the entrance. "This place hosts author events almost every week, and there's a writers group that meets here monthly. Denver has a really active literary scene." As we ate, Catherine shared her own story of relocating for career advancement, of leaving a comfortable but limiting situation for the uncertainty of something bigger. "I moved here 8 years ago from a small town in Wyoming," she said. "I was terrified, but it was the best decision I ever made. Sometimes growth requires letting go of safety." After dinner, I walked through downtown Denver alone, trying to imagine myself living there, working there, building a new life there. The city felt alive in a way Riverside never had, full of possibilities and energy and people pursuing dreams that extended beyond simple contentment. I thought about Mike walking these same streets while researching our potential future, falling in love with opportunities he wanted to share with me. I found myself standing outside the main library branch, looking up at its impressive facade and thinking about the research collections inside, the programs they offered, the community partnerships they facilitated. This was the kind of library system I dreamed of working with when I first studied library science, the kind of institution where I could grow professionally while making a meaningful impact. The next morning, I called Catherine from my hotel room and accepted the position. "I'm thrilled, Jessica," she said, and I could hear genuine excitement in her voice. "When would you like to start? Is 3 months too soon?" I asked, thinking about what it would take to wrap up my life in Riverside, sell the house, make the practical arrangements for such a major move. 3 months is perfect. That gives us time to prepare for your arrival and for you to make a smooth transition. Flying back to Oregon, I felt like I was returning to my old life as a visitor rather than a resident. The familiar landscape looked smaller somehow, not less beautiful but more limited, like a comfortable room I'd outgrown without realizing it. I thought about Mike making this same journey in reverse, traveling to Denver to research opportunities for both of us, carrying dreams for our future that he'd never have the chance to see realized. Emma picked me up at the airport, and I could see the question in her eyes before she asked it. I took the job, I said, as soon as I got in her car. Emma pulled over immediately and turned to look at me, her eyes bright with excitement and concern. How do you feel? Terrified and thrilled and guilty and hopeful all at the same time, I admitted. I keep thinking Mike should be here to share this with me, but I also keep feeling like he is here, like his research and his love are what made this possible. Jess, Mike would be so proud of you. He spent months planning ways to help you grow, and now you're actually doing it. You're honoring his memory by becoming the person he always believed you could be. The next 3 months passed in a blur of practical arrangements and emotional preparation. Selling the house was harder than I'd expected, not because of attachment to the building, but because it represented the only home Mike and I had ever shared as a married couple. But packing his belongings, I found myself focusing not on what I was leaving behind, but on what I was carrying forward: his love, his faith in my potential, his carefully researched dreams for our future. Richard helped me organize Mike's professional materials for donation to the company's training program, ensuring that his expertise would continue helping other adjusters serve their clients effectively. Linda, Mike's mother, flew up from California to help with the packing and to say goodbye to the house where her son had been happy. He would want you to do this, she said, as we wrapped his coffee mugs in newspaper. Mike always said you were the smartest person he knew, that you could accomplish anything if you just had the right opportunities. I think he'd be amazed that his research led to this chance for you. The morning I left Riverside, Emma drove me to the airport with a car full of suitcases and a heart full of mixed emotions. We sat in the departure area talking about our friendship, about staying connected across the distance, about the possibility that this move might inspire her to pursue changes in her own life. Promise me you'll come visit once I'm settled, I said, holding her hands as they announced my boarding group. Try to keep me away, she replied, tears in her eyes but smiling. I want to see what Jessica Parker looks like when she's living up to her full potential. Denver in early spring was nothing like Oregon, but as the plane descended through clear skies toward the mountains, I felt a sense of coming home that surprised me. This wasn't the home Mike and I had built together, but it was the home he'd envisioned for the person I could become. The city spread out below me like a map of possibilities, each neighborhood and landmark representing opportunities for growth and connection and meaningful work. Catherine met me at the airport again, this time as a colleague rather than an interviewer, and drove me to the furnished apartment the company had arranged for my first month while I looked for permanent housing. The space was small but bright, with windows facing the mountains and a view that made me catch my breath every morning. My first day at Pacific Northwest Insurance felt like stepping into a life I'd never imagined, but that fit perfectly. The community outreach team welcomed me with genuine warmth, and within hours I was contributing to program planning, suggesting partnerships with local schools, and designing curriculum for financial literacy workshops that would be held at library branches throughout the metro area. You're going to transform this program, David Martinez told me after my first week. Your educational background brings exactly the perspective we've been missing. The work was challenging in the best possible way, requiring me to combine my teaching skills with new knowledge about insurance and financial planning, to build relationships with community organizations, to develop programs that would genuinely serve people who needed practical education about protecting their financial futures. Every day brought new problems to solve and new ways to grow professionally. But the most meaningful change was how I felt about myself. For the first time in years, I was excited to go to work, energized by challenges rather than drained by routine, surrounded by colleagues who expected excellence and provided support for achieving it. I was becoming the person Mike had seen when he looked at me, the person I'd forgotten I could be. 6 months after moving to Denver, I received an email that made me stop breathing for a moment. The sender was Dr. Rebecca Torres from the University of Colorado's School of Library and Information Science, and the subject line read Collaboration Opportunity, Community Literacy Initiative. The email explained that the university had received a grant to develop innovative approaches to community-based literacy education, and they were looking for practitioners who could help bridge the gap between academic research and real-world application. Someone had recommended me based on the work I'd been doing with Pacific Northwest Insurance, and they wanted to discuss the possibility of my joining the project as a consultant, while also pursuing a master's degree in library science. I read the email 3 times before it sank in. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Mike had researched for me, the chance to advance my education while contributing to meaningful work in the field I'd always loved. The universe seemed to be conspiring to fulfill every dream Mike had identified in his careful planning for our future. That evening, I called Emma to share the news, then sat on my apartment balcony looking at the mountains and thinking about Mike. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but it was accompanied now by gratitude for his love and his vision. He'd spent months researching ways to help me grow, and his final gift was continuing to unfold in ways neither of us could have anticipated. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Dr. Torres, accepting her invitation to discuss the collaboration. As I typed, I thought about Mike's draft letter to me, about his words expressing his desire to see me excited about work again, challenged and inspired instead of just going through the motions. He'd wanted to give me the world, or at least a bigger piece of it, and in pursuing the opportunities he'd researched, I was finally accepting that gift. The city lights twinkled below my balcony as I finished the email and hit send. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow, new ways to honor Mike's memory by becoming the person he'd always believed I could be. I fell asleep that night, not just missing my husband, but grateful for his love, surrounded by the possibilities he'd researched and planned and dreamed for both of us. Mike's last email to his boss had been about requesting a meeting to discuss career advancement and geographic flexibility. He died before that conversation could happen, but his research had led me to opportunities he never could have imagined. Sometimes the most profound gift we can receive is someone else's faith in our potential, and sometimes the best way to honor love is to grow into the person that love helped us see we could become. 2 years had passed since I'd first opened Mike's laptop in our kitchen on Maple Street, and I was standing in the conference room of the University of Colorado's School of Library and Information Science, presenting my research on community-based financial literacy programs to a room full of professors, graduate students, and community partners. The PowerPoint slides behind me showed data from the program I'd helped develop at Pacific Northwest Insurance, demonstrating how literacy education could dramatically improve people's understanding of financial protection and planning. Dr. Rebecca Torres sat in the front row, nodding approvingly as I explained the methodology we'd used to reach underserved communities through library partnerships. Next to her was Catherine Wells, who had become not just my supervisor but a mentor and friend, someone who understood the unique path that had brought me to this moment. In the back of the room, I spotted Emma, who had flown in from Oregon specifically to attend my thesis defense, her proud smile giving me strength as I fielded questions from the academic panel. "Miss Parker," said Dr. James Morrison, the department head, "your work demonstrates exceptional innovation in bridging theoretical frameworks with practical application. The community impact data you've presented suggests that your approach could be scaled to serve much larger populations. What are your plans for continuing this research?" I took a deep breath, feeling Mike's presence with me as I prepared to share the next phase of my journey. "Actually, Dr. Morrison, I've been accepted to the doctoral program here at CU, and I'll be expanding this research to develop a comprehensive model for literacy-based financial education that can be implemented in communities across the country. Pacific Northwest Insurance has agreed to sponsor the research, and we're partnering with 5 library systems in different states to test the scalability of our approach." The room erupted in congratulations, and I felt a surge of pride that was tinged with bittersweet emotion. This moment represented everything Mike had envisioned when he'd spent those months researching opportunities for my professional growth. He'd seen potential in me that I'd forgotten existed, and pursuing the path he'd mapped out had led to achievements I never would have imagined possible when I was teaching 3rd grade in Riverside. After the defense, Emma and I walked across the university campus toward my favorite coffee shop, the autumn air crisp with the promise of winter. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, a daily reminder of how far I'd traveled from the small Oregon town, where I'd thought my ambitions had to remain small to match my circumstances. "I keep thinking Mike would be bursting with pride right now," Emma said, as we settled into comfortable chairs with our drinks. "Jess, you've not only accomplished everything he researched for you, you've gone beyond it. A doctoral program. When you were in Riverside, did you ever imagine you'd be Dr. Parker in a few years?" I laughed, still getting used to the idea myself. "Honestly, Emma, when I was grading spelling tests and managing 3rd grade reading groups, I thought my intellectual life was over. I'd convinced myself that being content was enough, that wanting more was somehow ungrateful or unrealistic. What changed? Emma asked, though I knew she already understood the answer. Finding Mike's research forced me to see myself through his eyes. He never stopped believing I was capable of growth, even when I'd stopped believing it about myself. Moving to Denver wasn't just about changing jobs or cities, it was about reclaiming the person I'd been before I decided to settle for safe instead of reaching for meaningful. Emma smiled, but I could see something wistful in her expression. You know, watching your transformation has made me question my own choices. I've been in the same position at the same company for 8 years now, telling myself I'm being practical and responsible. But maybe practical is just another word for scared. I reached across the table and took her hand. Emma, you don't have to make dramatic changes like I did. But maybe it's worth asking yourself what you'd research if you were planning your own future growth. What opportunities exist that you haven't explored because they feel too risky or impractical? That evening, I hosted a small celebration dinner at my apartment for the colleagues and friends who had supported my academic journey. Catherine brought champagne. Dr. Torres shared stories about other students who had successfully bridged academic and practical work. And David Martinez presented me with a framed photo of our team at a recent community event, where we'd helped over 200 families understand the basics of insurance and emergency financial planning. Jessica, Catherine said, as she raised her glass for a toast, when I first met you at the airport 2 years ago, I saw someone carrying enormous potential but also enormous grief. Watching you transform that grief into purpose, that loss into growth, has been one of the most inspiring professional experiences of my career. The compliment touched me deeply, but it also reminded me of the complex emotions I still carried about Mike's death and the opportunities that had emerged from it. Success felt wonderful, but it was always accompanied by the knowledge that I was living a life Mike would never get to share, pursuing dreams he'd researched but would never see fulfilled. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my balcony with Mike's laptop open beside me. I'd brought it with me to Denver, unable to leave behind the device that had revealed his faith in my potential. Sometimes I still read through his research, marveling at the thoroughness of his planning and the depth of his love for me. Tonight, I wanted to add my own entry to his files, a letter to him about where his research had led me. Dearest Mike, I typed, it's been 2 years since I found your secret plans for our future, and I want you to know that every opportunity you identified has opened doors I never imagined possible. The Denver job led to graduate school, which led to research opportunities, which led to a doctoral program that will let me develop programs to help communities across the country. You saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there, and pursuing your vision has changed not just my career but my entire sense of what's possible. I paused looking out at the city lights twinkling below my balcony, thinking about how to express the complexity of what I'd learned about love and loss and growth. I understand now why you kept your research secret. You weren't excluding me from decisions about our future, you were protecting me from the disappointment of hoping for changes that might not be possible. You wanted to present solutions, not problems, opportunities, not just wishes. Your love was so practical and so generous, always focused on my happiness and my growth. The words flowed as I described the past 2 years, the challenges and successes, the moments when I'd felt his presence guiding me through difficult decisions. I told him about the colleagues who had become dear friends, about the students I was mentoring through their own academic journeys, about the community programs that were changing lives in ways both of us could have been proud of. But Mike, I continued, I've also learned something about grief and healing that I want you to know. Missing you will always be part of who I am, but it doesn't have to be the only part. Your research gave me permission to grow beyond our life together while still honoring what we shared. I'm not the same person you married, but I'm the person you believed I could become, and that feels like the most beautiful way to love you now. I saved the letter in Mike's research folder, adding my words to his careful documentation of possibilities and dreams. The laptop had become a bridge between the life I'd lived with him and the life I was building because of him, a tangible reminder that love doesn't end with death, but transforms into something that can continue inspiring growth and purpose. The next morning brought an email that made me laugh out loud with delight. Emma had written to tell me she'd decided to apply for a master's program in sustainable business practices, something she'd been interested in for years, but had convinced herself was impractical. Watching you pursue Mike's research made me realize I need to do some research of my own, she wrote. Maybe it's time for me to stop being safe and start being brave. I immediately called her, eager to offer the same kind of support she'd given me during my darkest moments after Mike's death.
Emma, this is incredible. What made you finally decide to take the leap? Your thesis defense yesterday, she said, and I could hear excitement in her voice. Watching you present research that's going to help communities across the country, seeing how far you've come from that grieving woman who was afraid to open her husband's laptop, it made me realize that growth requires risk, and risk requires courage, and maybe I've been confusing caution with wisdom for too long. Emma's decision to pursue her own dreams felt like another gift from Mike's legacy. His research hadn't just changed my life, it had demonstrated to someone else that transformation was possible at any age, that it was never too late to reach for opportunities that seemed beyond current circumstances. That afternoon, I received a call from Richard Stevenson in Riverside. We'd stayed in touch sporadically since I'd moved to Denver, but this call felt different, more official. Jessica, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I have something I think Mike would have wanted you to know about. We're establishing a scholarship fund for employees' spouses who want to pursue continuing education or career advancement. The board voted unanimously to name it the Michael Parker Memorial Scholarship for Professional Growth. I felt tears spring to my eyes. Richard, that's beautiful. Mike would be so honored. The first recipient will be announced next month, and we plan to award 2 scholarships annually to help people pursue educational opportunities that might otherwise be financially out of reach. It seems like the perfect way to honor Mike's commitment to helping people improve their circumstances. The scholarship felt like another circle completing itself, another way Mike's love and vision were continuing to create opportunities for growth and advancement. His death had been a tragedy, but his life and his research were becoming a legacy that would help others pursue their own transformations. Winter in Denver brought a different kind of beauty than I'd known in Oregon, and I found myself falling in love with the city all over again, as snow transformed the landscape into something magical. The library where I often worked on my doctoral research became a refuge during blizzards, its warm reading rooms, filled with students and community members, all pursuing their own versions of growth and discovery. One snowy afternoon, while I was reviewing literature for my dissertation, a young woman approached my table with a hesitant smile. "Excuse me, are you Jessica Parker, from the Financial Literacy Program?" I looked up to see someone in her early 20s, wearing the uniform of a local coffee shop and carrying a stack of library books. "Yes, I am. Have we met?" "I'm Maria Santos. I attended one of your workshops last year at the North Denver Library. I just wanted to thank you, because what you taught us about emergency savings and insurance planning literally saved my family when my dad had a heart attack 3 months ago." Maria went on to explain how the workshop had inspired her to research financial protection strategies for her family, how the practical knowledge had helped them navigate her father's medical emergency without falling into debt, how the experience had motivated her to start taking business classes at the community college. "I'm going to transfer to the university next year to study finance," she said proudly. "I want to help other families the way your program helped mine. You probably don't remember, but you told us that education is the foundation of empowerment, and that really stuck with me." After Maria left, I sat in the library thinking about the ripple effects of the work I'd been able to pursue because of Mike's research. His careful planning for our future had led to programs that were changing lives, inspiring young people like Maria to pursue their own educational goals, creating opportunities for growth that extended far beyond what either of us could have imagined. That evening, I called Linda, Mike's mother, to share the encounter with Maria and to update her on my doctoral progress. Linda had become a cherished part of my chosen family, someone who understood the complex emotions of grieving Mike while celebrating the opportunities his legacy had created. "Jessica, honey, I need to tell you something," Linda said after I'd finished describing my day. "I've been cleaning out some of Mike's childhood things, and I found a journal he kept in high school. There's an entry from when he was 17 that I think you should hear." She read me Mike's teenage words, about wanting to marry someone who would challenge him to be better, someone whose dreams were big enough to inspire his own growth, someone he could support in pursuing ambitions that might seem impossible from small-town perspectives. He wrote that he wanted to spend his life helping his future wife become everything she was capable of being. Linda said softly, "Even as a teenager, Mike understood that the best kind of love creates space for the other person to grow." The entry felt like a message from Mike's younger self, confirmation that his research and planning had been expressions of a lifelong commitment to supporting my growth and potential. He dreamed of helping someone pursue big ambitions, and through his careful documentation of opportunities, he'd made those dreams possible even after his death. As spring returned to Denver, bringing warmer weather and longer days, I found myself thinking about the future with excitement rather than anxiety. My doctoral research was progressing well, with preliminary findings suggesting that literacy-based financial education could indeed be scaled to serve communities nationwide. Pacific Northwest Insurance was planning to expand the program to additional states, and I'd been invited to present my work at the National Conference on Community Education. More importantly, I was happy. Not the careful contentment I'd cultivated in Riverside, but genuine joy in my work, my relationships, and my sense of purpose. I was contributing to meaningful change in people's lives, while pursuing intellectual challenges that kept me growing and learning. Mike's research had led me to a life that felt abundant rather than merely adequate. One sunny afternoon, while I was walking through Cheeseman Park near my apartment, I found myself thinking about time and loss, and the strange ways life can transform tragedy into opportunity. Mike had been gone for almost 3 years, but his influence on my life was stronger than ever. His death had been devastating, but his research had become the foundation for achievements neither of us had imagined possible. I thought about the woman I'd been when I first opened his laptop, terrified and hurt and convinced that his secret planning represented betrayal. That woman couldn't have imagined the life I was living now, couldn't have believed that grief could coexist with joy, that loss could lead to growth, that endings could become beginnings. Mike's final email to his boss had never been sent, but his research had led to conversations and opportunities that exceeded anything he could have planned. Sometimes the most profound gifts come not from what we achieve together, but from what we inspire each other to achieve alone. Mike's love had been practical and visionary, focused not just on our happiness in the moment, but on my potential for long-term growth and fulfillment. As I walked home through the late afternoon sunshine, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me from that dark kitchen in Riverside to this bright life in Denver. Mike's laptop had revealed not just his secret plans but my own capacity for transformation, not just his faith in my potential, but my ability to honor that faith through sustained effort and courage. The grief would always be part of me, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had become integrated into a larger story about love and growth, and the ways we can continue caring for each other even after death. Mike's research had been his final gift to me, but building on that research, creating programs that helped others, pursuing education that would extend my impact, that was my gift back to him. That night, I opened his laptop one more time and added a final entry to the letter I'd been writing to him over the past 2 years. Mike, I want you to know that your research didn't just change my life, it taught me how to live with purpose instead of just surviving with grace. You saw possibilities I couldn't see, believed in growth I thought was impossible, and loved me enough to plan for a future where I could become everything you believed I was capable of being. Your legacy isn't just in the opportunities you identified, but in the courage you inspired me to find within myself. Thank you for loving me enough to help me grow, even when growth meant learning to flourish.
Without you, I closed the laptop and looked out at the Denver skyline, thinking about tomorrow's challenges and opportunities, about the students I would mentor and the communities I would serve, about the research that would help families like Maria's navigate financial uncertainties with knowledge and confidence. Mike's vision for our future had become my mission for the present, and that felt like the most beautiful way to honor both his memory and our love. The mountains glowed in the distance, constant and majestic, reminding me that some things endure even as others change. Mike was gone, but his influence on my life continued to grow and deepen, shaping not just my career but my understanding of what it means to love someone enough to want them to become their best self. His research had been a love letter to my potential, and living up to that potential had become my love letter back to him. 5 years after discovering Mike's research, I stood at the podium of the National Library Association's annual conference in Chicago, looking out at an audience of over 800 librarians, educators, and community advocates. The PowerPoint behind me displayed the title of my keynote address, From Personal Loss to Community Gain: How One Man's Research Transformed Financial Literacy Education. My hands were steady as I clicked to the first slide, though my heart raced with the weight of the story I was about to share. Sometimes the most profound discoveries come from the most ordinary moments, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. 5 years ago, I was a third-grade teacher in a small Oregon town, searching for batteries in my late husband's toolbox. What I found instead was a blueprint for transformation that would not only change my life but impact thousands of families across the country. The audience was immediately attentive, leaning forward as I described finding Mike's laptop, the shock of discovering his secret research, and the journey that had led from that moment of perceived betrayal to this platform where I could share the results of our work with professionals dedicated to community education. I explained how Mike's careful documentation of opportunities had evolved into the Community Financial Literacy Initiative, now operating in 37 states and serving over 50,000 families annually. The program had grown far beyond what either of us could have imagined, with partnerships spanning public libraries, community colleges, insurance companies, and social service organizations. Dr. Parker came a question from the audience during the Kunda session. Your research demonstrates remarkable success in reaching underserved populations. What do you attribute to the program's effectiveness? I thought carefully before answering, wanting to honor both the academic rigor of our methodology and the emotional truth that had inspired it. I believe our success comes from understanding that financial literacy isn't just about numbers and policies, it's about hope and security and the belief that families can protect what they've worked to build. My husband's research taught me that the most effective education happens when we meet people where they are and show them paths forward that feel achievable rather than overwhelming. After the presentation, I was approached by Dr. Sarah Kim from the Gates Foundation, who had been following our work for the past 2 years. Her proposal took my breath away, a national expansion of the Community Financial Literacy Initiative, with funding to establish programs in all 50 states and develop train-the-trainer models that could be adapted internationally. Parker, we believe your approach could be transformative on a global scale, Dr. Kim explained as we sat in the conference center's quiet cafe. The combination of literacy education and practical financial knowledge addresses two critical needs simultaneously. We'd like to discuss a partnership that could reach millions of families over the next decade. The scope of the opportunity was staggering, and I found myself thinking of Mike's methodical research style, how he would have approached such a complex expansion with careful planning and attention to detail. His influence on my work continued to guide major decisions, his systematic approach to problem-solving having become second nature to me over the years. That evening, I called Emma from my hotel room, needing to share the magnitude of what had been offered. She had completed her master's degree in sustainable business practices the year before and was now working as a consultant for environmental nonprofits, her own transformation inspired by watching mine unfold. "Jess, this is incredible," Emma said, her excitement palpable even over the phone. "Mike's research is going to impact families around the world. Can you imagine what he would think about this?" "I think he'd be amazed but not surprised," I replied, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Mike always believed that small actions could have far-reaching consequences. He just never could have predicted that his secret planning would lead to international programs helping millions of people. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been pondering myself. "Are you ready for something this big?"
Whoa.
It would mean years of travel, massive responsibility, probably less time for your own research and writing. The question went to the heart of what I'd learned about growth and purpose over the past 5 years. "Emma, I've spent half a decade building on Mike's foundation, creating something meaningful from our shared loss. But I think I'm ready to step into something even bigger now. This isn't just about honoring his memory anymore, it's about using everything I've learned to create the kind of impact we both would have wanted to make." The next morning, I met with Dr. Kim and her team to discuss the specifics of the partnership. The Gates Foundation's proposal included funding for a research institute dedicated to financial literacy education, with me as the director and a team of researchers working to develop best practices for diverse communities and cultural contexts. "We're not just talking about scaling up existing programs," explained Dr. Martinez, the Foundation's education director. "We want to create a global center of excellence that can adapt financial literacy education to different economic systems, cultural values, and literacy levels. Your work has shown that this education can be transformative when it's done thoughtfully and systematically." The institute would be based in Denver, allowing me to maintain the life I'd built there while expanding my impact internationally. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mike's research had led me to Denver, and now Denver would become the hub for work that could reach families on every continent. As I reviewed the partnership documents, I thought about the trajectory that had brought me to this moment. The grieving widow who had felt betrayed by her husband's secret planning could never have imagined directing an international research institute, but each step of growth had prepared me for the next challenge. That afternoon, I took a cab to Graceland Cemetery, wanting some quiet space to process the magnitude of the opportunity I was considering. Walking among the peaceful monuments and gardens, I found myself having an imaginary conversation with Mike about the decision ahead. "You always said I was capable of more than I believed," I whispered to the autumn air. "You spent months researching ways to help me grow, but I don't think even you imagined it would lead to this. The question is whether I'm brave enough to accept responsibility for work that could impact millions of families." The answer came not as words but as a feeling of certainty that had become familiar over the years, the sense that Mike's love continued to guide me toward opportunities that would challenge me to become my best self. His research had been about more than career advancement or geographic relocation. It had been about believing in potential and taking risks for the possibility of greater impact. I called Dr. Kim that evening and accepted the partnership. The announcement of the Global Financial Literacy Institute generated significant media attention, with articles in education journals, interviews on public radio, and feature stories about how personal tragedy had inspired innovative approaches to community education. Through it all, I made sure Mike's story was told accurately, ensuring that people understood how his love and research had made everything possible. The most meaningful response came from Richard Stevenson, who called to congratulate me and to share news about the Michael Parker Memorial Scholarship. "Jessica, we've now awarded 12 scholarships over the past 3 years, and every recipient has gone on to achieve significant educational or career advancement. Mike's legacy is multiplying in ways none of us could have predicted." Richard went on to tell me about the latest scholarship recipient, a single mother who was using the funding to complete her nursing degree, and about how the program had inspired other companies in Riverside to establish similar educational support initiatives. "Mike would be amazed to know that his name is associated with helping so many people pursue their dreams," Richard said. "But I think he'd be even more proud of what you've accomplished. You've taken his research and created something that's changing the world." The first year of directing the Institute was intense and exhilarating, involving travel to communities across the United States and internationally to understand how financial literacy education needed to be adapted for different contexts. I met with families in rural Kentucky who needed help understanding farm insurance, with immigrant communities in Los Angeles learning to navigate the American banking system, and with indigenous groups in Alaska developing culturally appropriate approaches to financial planning. Each community taught me something new about the intersection of education, culture, and economic empowerment. Mike's systematic research approach served me well as I documented best practices and developed frameworks that could be adapted across vastly different contexts. One particularly meaningful trip took me to a refugee resettlement center in Minneapolis, where I worked with families who had fled violence in their home countries and were trying to rebuild their lives in an unfamiliar economic system. The coordinator, Hassan Ali, explained how financial literacy education was crucial for helping refugees achieve stability and independence. "Dr. Parker, many of our families come from places where banking systems were unreliable or where insurance didn't exist," Hassan said as we toured the center's education facilities. "Teaching them about American financial systems isn't just about money, it's about helping them feel secure enough to plan for the future." Working with the refugee families reminded me of my own journey from confusion and fear to understanding and confidence. Mike's research had helped me navigate the transition from small-town teacher to international education director, just as our programs were helping these families navigate their own transitions to safety and stability. The second year brought expansion to partnerships in 12 countries, with programs adapted for communities in Kenya, Bangladesh, Guatemala, and the Philippines. Each adaptation required careful attention to local economic conditions, cultural values, and existing educational infrastructure. In Kenya, I worked with librarians in Nairobi to develop programs that integrated traditional community saving practices with modern insurance concepts. In Bangladesh, we partnered with microfinance organizations to provide financial literacy education alongside small business loans. Each program built on the core principles Mike's research had revealed, that effective education meets people where they are and provides practical tools for improving their circumstances. The most challenging but rewarding work happened in Guatemala, where we developed Spanish-language materials for indigenous communities with limited formal education. Working with local educators, we created visual and storytelling approaches to financial concepts that honored traditional knowledge while introducing new tools for economic protection. "Dr. Parker," said Elena Morales, our partner coordinator in Guatemala City, "what you've created here isn't just education, it's empowerment. These families are learning that they have options, that they can protect themselves and their children in ways they never knew were possible." Elena's words reminded me of something Mike had written in one of his research documents about empowerment through knowledge. He'd believed that education was the foundation of choice, that people could only make good decisions when they understood their options. Our global programs were proving that principle true across cultures and economic systems. By the third year, the Institute had documented success stories from every continent. A farming cooperative in Mali had used our insurance education to protect their harvest investments. A women's group in rural India had started a community-based savings program after completing our financial literacy workshops. Urban families in Sao Paulo had avoided predatory lending by learning to understand loan terms and interest rates. The data was compelling, but the personal stories were what kept me motivated during long days of grant writing, program development, and administrative responsibilities. Every family that gained financial security, every community that developed better economic resilience, felt like a continuation of Mike's original vision for helping people improve their circumstances. One autumn afternoon, as I was reviewing quarterly reports from our international partners, I received an unexpected email from Maria Santos, the young woman who had thanked me in the Denver library several years earlier. She was now finishing her finance degree and had been accepted to graduate school for a master's in international development. Dr. Parker, her email read, "I wanted you to know that your workshop didn't just help my family, it changed the entire direction of my life. I'm writing my thesis on financial literacy education in Latino communities, and I've been following the work of your institute. I hope someday I can contribute to programs like the ones that inspired me to pursue this field." Maria's message represented the ripple effects that extended far beyond program statistics and success metrics. Mike's research had led to work that was inspiring the next generation of educators and advocates, creating a legacy that would continue long after my own involvement ended. That evening, I sat in my Denver apartment with Mike's laptop, reading through his original research files for what had become an annual ritual. His systematic documentation of opportunities still amazed me, but now I could see patterns and principles that had taken years to fully understand. Mike hadn't just been researching career advancement or geographic relocation, he'd been studying how to create conditions for growth and fulfillment. His spreadsheets comparing cities weren't just about cost of living and job markets, they were about identifying environments where curiosity could flourish, where challenges could lead to expansion rather than limitation. "You taught me that love means believing in someone's potential even when they can't see it themselves." I typed in a new document. "Your research showed me that growth requires both vision and practical planning, that dreams need systematic support to become reality. The institute we've built stands on the foundation you created, and every family we help represents your faith in the power of education to transform lives." The next morning brought news that would have seemed impossible when I first opened Mike's laptop 8 years earlier. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization had invited our institute to present our methodology to their Global Education Forum, with the possibility of integrating our approach into UNESCO's worldwide literacy initiatives. Dr. Kim called personally to share the invitation. "Jessica, this could mean reaching hundreds of millions of people over the next decade. UNESCO wants to explore how financial literacy education could be incorporated into their basic literacy programs globally." The scope was breathtaking, representing the kind of impact that would require decades to fully measure. Mike's careful research into opportunities for one couple in Oregon had evolved into work that could influence educational policy worldwide. As I prepared for the UNESCO presentation, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from small-town grief to international recognition. The woman who had felt betrayed by her husband's secret planning could never have imagined addressing world leaders about education policy, but each challenge had prepared me for greater responsibility. The presentation in Paris was attended by education ministers from 43 countries, representatives from major international development organizations, and advocates for literacy education from every region of the world. Standing at the podium in the UNESCO headquarters, I felt the weight of representing not just my own work but Mike's vision, and the families whose lives had been changed by programs built on his research. "Distinguished delegates," I began, "I want to share with you how one man's love for his wife became a catalyst for educational innovation that has reached families on 6 continents. This story demonstrates how personal transformation can inspire global change, how individual research can become international policy, and how love expressed through education can cross every cultural and economic boundary." The response was overwhelming, with multiple countries requesting partnerships and UNESCO committing to pilot programs in 25 nations over the following 3 years. The announcement generated global media coverage, with stories focusing on how personal tragedy had inspired educational innovation that could benefit millions of families worldwide. After the UNESCO presentation, I received a message that brought tears to my eyes. Linda, Mike's mother, now in her 70s, had written to congratulate me and to share a memory that perfectly captured why the international recognition felt so meaningful. Jessica, honey, her letter read, I keep thinking about something Mike said when he was about 10 years old. He told me he wanted to grow up to help people solve problems they didn't know how to solve. You've taken his research and created exactly the kind of impact he dreamed of having. I know he would be amazed and proud beyond words. Linda's message reminded me that Mike's systematic approach to research had been motivated by a childhood desire to help people solve problems. The institute we'd built was fulfilling that early vision on a scale he never could have imagined, but the heart of the work remained the same, helping families understand their options and make informed decisions about protecting their financial security. The final vindication of Mike's research came 5 years later, when the Global Financial Literacy Institute received the UNESCO Prize for Literacy, recognizing our contribution to improving lives through innovative educational approaches. Standing on the stage in Paris to accept the award, I thought about the journey from that dark kitchen in Riverside to this moment of international recognition. In my acceptance speech, I shared Mike's story in detail, explaining how his secret research had been motivated by love and faith in human potential. I described how his systematic approach to identifying opportunities had become the foundation for programs that were now helping families in 93 countries build financial security and resilience. This award belongs not just to our institute team, I concluded, but to a man who died believing that education could transform lives, that love could inspire growth, and that systematic research could reveal pathways to better futures. Mike Parker's legacy lives on in every family that gains financial literacy, every community that develops economic resilience, and every person who learns that they have more options than they realized. After the ceremony, I walked along the Seine as evening light reflected off the water, thinking about time and love, and the mysterious ways that endings can become beginnings. Mike had been gone for 9 years, but his influence on the world continued to expand, touching lives he never could have imagined reaching. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote a final entry in the document I'd been updating for nearly a decade, my ongoing letter to Mike about where his research had led. My dearest Mike, today I accepted an international award for work that began with your secret planning in our small Oregon town. Your research has grown into programs that serve millions of families globally, that influence education policy in dozens of countries, and that continue inspiring new approaches to community empowerment. You saw potential I couldn't see, believed in growth I thought was impossible, and loved me enough to plan for a future where I could become everything you knew I was capable of being. Your legacy isn't just in the opportunities you identified, it's in the courage you inspired me to find, the vision you helped me develop, and the love you taught me to share with communities around the world. Thank you for showing me that the best kind of love creates space for infinite growth, and that sometimes the most profound gifts come wrapped in apparent endings. I closed the laptop and looked out at the city of light, thinking about tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. About the communities we would serve, and the families whose lives would be changed by education built on Mike's foundation of systematic research and limitless faith in human potential. His vision for our future had become my mission for the world, and that felt like the most beautiful way to honor both his memory and our love. The grief would always be part of me, but it had been transformed into purpose, loss into legacy, ending into infinite beginning. Mike's research lived on in every program we developed, every partnership we formed, every family that gained the knowledge and confidence to build a more secure future. His love had become a global force for empowerment and growth, proving that sometimes the most personal losses can inspire the most universal gains. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.